Welcome back to College Recruiter, where we believe that every student and recent grad deserves a great career. I'm Anna Peters, and content manager, and I am joined yet again by three members of our panel of experts. And we are diving into part two of our discussion around diversity recruitment, strategies for improvement. So very quickly, the three people who I am joined with are Toni Newborn with the City of St. Paul. She's the city's diversity and consulting services manager, and she manages their strategic plans to diversify the city's workforce. Alexandra Levitt is a workforce consultant who helps organizations and their employees prepare for meaningful careers. And Bruce Saltis is at Travelers. He's their director of university relations and leads a team in their strategies for sourcing, attracting, and recruiting diverse candidates. So welcome again.
Thank you.
Here we go, part two. I'm excited to dive in. Why don't we start with some of the, Toni, I'm going to put this on you. Since you're in government, can you tell us, and of course, Alex and Bruce, you can jump in as well with your input. What are some of the differences in recruiting tactics around this topic of diversity recruitment between government and the private sector? What comes to mind?
So many things. I could probably spend the rest of the presentation.
If you need, I'll cut you off.
Yeah, please do cut me off. You know, usually money is the first thing that happens with the difference between government and private sector. And, you know, I know each organization has different budgets and that sort of thing. But generally, if we compare government with our larger corporations, money is a factor. In particular, for example, I have one recruiter for the City of St. Paul and myself, and we do the recruiting for the entire city. And so it'd be great for us to have about 5 in order to be able to really develop those relationships and establish those contacts. But right now I have 1. Mm-hmm. And so that means we have to be very strategic around where we're going, who we're connecting with, and how we do make the biggest bang for our buck, so to speak. And related to the money piece is, you know, we talked earlier in part 1 of this session around going to maybe historically Black colleges or going to colleges and universities that are relatively diverse. You know, we don't really do that, and nor do we have the budget to do that. So we have to stay here within the Twin Cities mostly. We can't fly out to Atlanta or to Alabama or to some of our southern states that have these the diversity that we're looking for to recruit. So we have to be very strategic around what are the demographics within the state of Minnesota, specifically within maybe the 7-county metro, and then even further than that, the Twin Cities, both Minneapolis and St. Paul.
And to rely on digital recruitment too, I imagine.
To rely on digital recruitment is key. I mean, we use a lot of the applicant tracking systems as do other recruiters. And again, the strategy is key for us, but it's part of recruitment in general. But that when you have strategy plus money, that you can play. And of course the people to be able to do that. So without that, the strategy really comes into play. And that means that myself and my staff are spending a lot more time on the relationship building and community partnership building.
That's impactful. Is there anything that you would add, Alex or Bruce?
I think that, Toni had mentioned one of the things around the availability of talent within a certain, geographic area. And I think that that's something we're very cognizant of in the college recruiting ranks. So understanding the availability of talent within a certain geography. And we do a lot of data-related efforts to educate, our local managers about, we want to move the diversity needle, but do we truly have an understanding of the available talent that is within geographic radius of our office at the certain colleges? And that's one of the things that we use to help differentiate engagement at certain schools. Even within the confines of a certain city, there are going to be more diverse schools that we have the opportunity to engage with. So we really do a deep dive into understanding what that base looks like at a certain school. And we really break it down to major, because we know that we're hiring certain backgrounds and looking at, the entire demographic of an entire university system is not as definitive as understanding, okay, when we break it down to the degree types that we tend to hire, what does the demographic look like in the recent graduating class there? So really that data intensive look is something that we're very cognizant about, because we do hire in that Atlanta metro area. Like Tony said, we do hire in the St. Paul area, and we deal with that all the time, right? The demographic in and around the St. Paul area may not be as diverse as we want it to be at the collegiate level, but are we going to be able to entice students from other geographies to go to that market, and so forth? So just highly encourage everyone to take that data-centric view, because you can't really argue with numbers.
Yeah,
that's absolutely true. And I would just add too that, and this is not just beneficial from a diversity standpoint, but from a recruitment standpoint in general, is to go beyond college even. Start, if you are limited to a particular geographic area, go to the high schools in your area. Gen Z is the up and coming generation of high school students right now, and they have shown a willingness to engage with employers at an even younger age than, let's say, the millennials. And so that's a great way. Go to a high school in your geographic area and start developing relationships with diverse students and become mentors. Allow them to come on site and do shadowing or internships, and become a source for them in terms of what educational opportunities they should be taking advantage of, and help to mold and shape them. And I think you'll find that can be a very good source of people who will eventually be qualified and in a good position to work as entry-level professionals in your organization.
And Anna, one last thing that I wanted to add that I should have started out with first is a key difference in recruiting is that because of our hiring process, it tends to take a long time. And we can't go out to Atlanta or to or anywhere, any type of job fair, and hire someone on the spot. And so we have to, our candidates have to go through a probably 30-day, 45-day hiring process. And that's just part of the state law, city laws, policies and procedures that are here. And so that's a key difference that I would be remiss in if I didn't mention that, because that, oftentimes the private sector is looked upon as more attractive because of the length of time that it takes. But there's some benefits on the end with government as well. But I think our hiring process is a key difference.
Mm-hmm. The length. Although I think even private too, they struggle with how long it takes.
Yeah. I think it's so much better, but it isn't.
Maybe people think they're really quick.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the process. We touched on in our last conversation about the resume and how some employers, with the tools that they have, can try to eliminate or erase any information that would allude to any demographics. So that's one tool in the process. Interviewing, let's talk about the whole recruitment process. What would an inclusive recruitment process, hiring process look like?
I think the one for me is, we often think of the recruiting process starting with the candidate application. And, if you take that approach, you are beholden to the whole, post and pray mentality.
Yeah, you're already behind.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what are you doing as a recruiter, as a company, to help develop the top of that funnel? And that's where the outreach, the engagement, working with diverse and inclusive, partners and organizations, that's really, I think, the start of it. So, you're not going to have this diverse and inclusive, hiring process if you're not going pre-application and making sure that people are aware of the opportunities out there, that they're meeting with ambassadors of your company to understand what it's, has to offer them, and what that career path has to offer them. So thinking pre-application is really key in my mind to ensuring a successful, recruiting end-to-end process. It doesn't start with the application.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think while we all know that diversity training and unconscious bias training is not the be-all, end-all to solve these problems, I think it's a start in terms of making sure that everybody on the front lines interviewing and assessing candidates has had some education in unconscious bias, simply because unconscious bias is unconscious and we're not doing it on purpose. So because we don't want to hire particular people, it's just something that happens. But I've in my experience, I found in groups that I've worked with, even just being aware that you might have certain biases can help you combat them. And when you're interviewing a candidate, you might be expecting them to act or be a certain way. And you can take a step back and say, let me make sure that all of my criteria are objective, that I'm evaluating apples to apples and oranges to oranges, and that I'm really cognizant of what I'm doing and want to give everybody a fair shot. So it's not the answer for everything, but I think it's at least a start in terms of ensuring that the entire process is inclusive and not exclusive by means of things that sometimes are just human nature that we aren't even aware we're doing.
Or to have embedded bias in that process, to have somebody really take an analytical eye to this.
Exactly. It happens all the time.
Yep. Tony, what do you say about that?
I would add to, I think Alexandria talked about this a little bit earlier about the candidate's experience and making sure that that's at the focal point of a recruitment process as well, because that is, whether the candidate will get the job offer or not, that could determine, their experience could determine whether they apply for one of your positions again or engage with your organization for another position. And so what we've been working on, because our process can tend to be kind of slow, what we've been working on is making sure that our candidates are getting regular updates from us. And it may sound like something very simple, but, we haven't been doing that. We haven't been sending our candidates an email saying, hey, we received your application. Mm-hmm. You're on this list. You're on that list. Here's the status of it. And we're starting to do that. And regardless of the fact of whether the candidate receives that offer or not, I want to make sure that they receive have a positive experience with us. And so that they can say, okay, I didn't get the job, but you should apply for jobs with the city of St. Paul because you're going to have a really good experience. And they have professional folks working there. And this is an organization that I would want to be a part of in the future.
Yeah. So that makes me think of something, Tony, is adding a touch point to your recruitment process. If your lens is initially, how do I make this more inclusive to people that we might be previously excluding, this population or this group over here? By doing that, you're making it better for everyone. It's universal. And I think of, the button that we all push. If you've got a box in your hands and you're pushing the button to open the door, initially that was the design for people in a wheelchair, right? You push the button to open the door, but everybody uses it. Yeah. It's universal. So by looking at how you can make your candidate experience more inclusive, you're making it more positive for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Great points, Tony.
Let's do a round robin here with one last question. If you can give one concrete tip to the talent acquisition professionals out there who are struggling, or maybe not struggling and just want another tip to improve their diversity recruitment strategies.
I think the first thing that I would say, I'll continue on my data theme because it is an element that we've really built in. So a lot of times, I've been at Travelers for just about a year now, and one of the first things we've tried to do is implement additional data measures. So at the end of the day, a lot of businesses from a college portfolio would look at, okay, our class was comprised of X% of this underrepresented minority or diversity group. And that would be it. So you'd be staring at this number and you'd be saying, well, is that good or bad? Right. I don't know. I'm looking at a number. So the relativity of that number. So what we've done is build in measures to understand, okay, your diversity results were this percentage, but from an availability amongst the schools that you recruit at, it's this percentage. So you understand whether or not you over-index or under-index or where you stand. It gives you some sort of measure against that. Likewise, what we're building in now is to understand what does the candidate funnel look like. So at the end of the day, if my hiring class was, and I'll just make something up, 50%, people of color, what was that like at the top of the funnel? Maybe my applicants were only 30% people of color. So that really shows that, even though it was a 30% people of color applicant pool, it still resulted in a 50% hiring class. So it carried through. Whereas maybe the pool, 80%. So there's a significant drop off. So measuring that end number, that hiring number against something that's relative throughout that process has been something we've really tried to incorporate, because you need to be able to judge yourself, and using data to do that has been, the route that we've chosen to take.
Yep. My tip has to do with candidate pools too. I was just going to say that we need to strategically seed the pools so that we have more female and minority candidates in the final pools. There was some really interesting research in Harvard Business Review a little while back that showed that when you only have one female or one minority candidate in the final pool, they have virtually 0% chance of getting hired. But if you have two, or several, then for some reason it reduces the unconscious bias and makes it much more likely. In the case of women, their chances of getting hired when there's more than one woman in the pool is up to 100% greater than if there's only one. And for minority candidates, it's almost 200% greater if there's more than one in the final pool. So being able to just place people in the right situations so that they're more likely to rise to the top.
I wonder if that is related to tokenism, like somehow, the bias is, this
Probably.
person is here because.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
My one tip would be around connecting with both Alexandra and Scott's recommendations around the accountability piece. So, one of the things that we're working on is we're using data for sure, and making sure that we can judge ourselves, and we're setting up goals and looking at the candidate pool, whether our candidate pool is diverse. But then when it's not, and we're starting to look at that data and see some trends happening, what we're trying to do with my one recruiter is come in and say, hey, what's going on? You said that this is what your goal was for this year as far as your hiring and promotions and diversifying your work group. What's going on here? And what are some ways that we in HR and as a recruiter can help you course correct or make some changes, or, maybe even identify that you may have some bias going on or some structural racism or institutional racism going on in your process. And what can we do from an HR standpoint, a recruiter standpoint, to change that?
Mm-hmm. Responding to the data. That is part 2, isn't it? So using data is the start, but then actually responding to it has to be part of it. Mm-hmm. Good. All very good thoughts. Thank you to the 3 of you. I appreciate all of your insight and expertise. So hopefully those watching and the talent acquisition professionals, especially watching out there, have gleaned a little or gotten a little bit of advice from our conversation. So I'm sure we will touch base again soon around something new, a different topic. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We'll see you.